Have you ever paused in the middle of your day, maybe while walking, working, or staring out the window, and suddenly wondered, why do I think the way I think? What if every idea, every belief, every question that has ever crossed your mind is not just an abstract thought, but a physical dance of tiny electric storms happening deep inside your brain? You see, every time you wonder about existence, morality, or the meaning of life, you're not just being philosophical. You're experiencing one of the most fascinating processes in the universe: consciousness trying to understand itself. Philosophical thought and neuroscience are not opposites, they are mirrors. Philosophy gives us the questions, and neuroscience gives us the tools to see how those questions are born, shaped, and transformed inside our minds. When Socrates questioned what is right or wrong, he wasn't just starting a debate. He was triggering neural networks responsible for moral reasoning, empathy, and reflection. His brain, and every human brain, is wired to question. Somewhere in the prefrontal cortex, the same area that helps us weigh consequences and make decisions, neurons fired and created what we now call philosophy. And think about this. The entire history of philosophy, from Plato's allegory of the cave to Descartes' "I think, therefore I am," is actually the story of the human brain slowly becoming aware of its own complexity. We are, in essence, neurons trying to understand neurons. The soul, the self, the I, all these ideas are born from billions of connections whispering in silence inside our heads. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine your own brain. Billions of neurons, tiny electric pulses sparking, connecting, disconnecting, forming meaning. When you think about love, your limbic system lights up. When you doubt yourself, the prefrontal cortex debates with the emotional centers. When you feel awe at the stars, your parietal lobes shift your sense of space and self. Every philosophical reflection you've ever had about truth, life, morality, or God is rooted in this living, breathing network. And yet, what's astonishing is how these biological sparks create something far greater: meaning. Let's take a simple example. When you ask, "Why am I here?" it seems like a deep spiritual question. But look closer. To even ask that, your brain must integrate memory, emotion, and logic. It must pull from stored experiences, weigh emotional resonance, and imagine possible futures. That process activates regions like the hippocampus for memory, the amygdala for emotion, and the prefrontal cortex for reasoning. What we call wonder is actually your brain's symphony, logic and emotion harmonizing. Philosophy has always been about the unseen, the intangible, the questions that can't be measured. But neuroscience is slowly revealing that even the unseen leaves footprints in the mind. When a philosopher contemplates existence, neurons fire in rhythmic patterns that mirror deep meditation. When someone wrestles with ethical dilemmas, brain scans show the emotional and rational systems debating with each other, just like Plato's dialogues. The old philosophers didn't have fMRI machines, but they had intuition, and that intuition led them remarkably close to the truth. Aristotle once said, "Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom." Neuroscience now shows us how literal that is. The brain's self-awareness centers, like the anterior cingulate cortex and the insula, are activated when you reflect on your own behavior, feelings, or purpose. Every time you catch yourself thinking, "Why did I react that way?" or "Who am I becoming?" your neurons are mapping your inner world. You're literally watching yourself from within. And isn't that what philosophy has always tried to do? To step outside of one's own mind, to look inward with honesty and curiosity. That's what makes us human. A tiger doesn't question the morality of hunting. A tree doesn't wonder about its purpose. But you can observe your own thoughts. You can challenge them. You can rewrite them. And that capacity for reflection is both a philosophical miracle and a neurological masterpiece. Now imagine a philosopher sitting late at night, candlelight flickering, scribbling questions into a notebook. His thoughts are slow but heavy. He feels something sacred in the process, a kind of conversation with the universe. What he doesn't see, of course, is that inside his skull, trillions of synapses are doing their own quiet work, exchanging chemicals, forming new pathways, deepening understanding. Each insight is physically etched into the brain's structure. The more he reflects, the stronger those connections become. In neuroscience, this is called neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reshape itself through thought. So when philosophy changes your perspective, it is literally changing your brain. Think about how powerful that is. Every new idea, every realization about life actually rewires you. When you read a philosophical quote that shifts your worldview, your brain is physically altered. A few new synapses form, a few old ones fade away, and your inner map of reality transforms. Now, let's bring this closer to real life. Imagine you're standing in front of a mirror after a hard day. You've made a mistake, hurt someone's feelings, or failed at something you cared about. The voice in your head starts speaking, the same inner dialogue philosophers spent their lives analyzing. Why did I do that? What does this say about who I am? Can I become better? That's not just you being emotional. That's the philosophical brain at work. Your neurons are trying to reconcile logic and emotion, ethics and impulse. They're trying to find balance, meaning, redemption. In that moment, you're both the scientist and the subject, observing yourself, analyzing yourself, forgiving yourself. That's what it means to be human. Philosophical thinking doesn't only live in books or debates. It lives in these small, quiet moments. When you forgive someone, when you question your purpose, when you choose empathy over anger. These are philosophical choices rooted in neural processes. The prefrontal cortex quiets the amygdala's rage. The mirror neurons fire, making you feel another's pain. The insula reminds you of past experiences. Suddenly, compassion isn't abstract. It's biological. And yet, it feels spiritual. That is the beautiful paradox of being human, that our spirituality emerges from our biology. Neuroscientists have found that the brain responds to moral and philosophical reflection the same way it does to music or art. It activates pleasure centers, releasing dopamine, creating a feeling of harmony. That's why, when you finally understand something profound, a truth about yourself or the world, it feels peaceful, even euphoric. Philosophy at its best is not about confusion. It's about coherence, when the chaos of thought aligns into meaning. Sometimes, philosophy can be painful. Think of Nietzsche spiraling between genius and despair, or Descartes doubting everything that could be doubted until only thought itself remained. These weren't just intellectual exercises. They were neurological storms. Their minds were pushing the boundaries of what the human brain could tolerate, oscillating between clarity and madness. It's the same balance we all live with, between curiosity and fear, between knowing and uncertainty. The more you think deeply, the more you risk unraveling. Yet, it's through that unraveling that deeper understanding emerges. Have you ever had a night where your thoughts kept you awake, questioning your choices, your relationships, your place in the world? That's philosophy meeting neuroscience. Your amygdala triggers emotion, your hippocampus recalls memory, and your prefrontal cortex tries to make sense of it all. You might call it anxiety or overthinking, but in truth, it's the same process that once gave birth to the greatest ideas of humanity. You are, in those moments, your own philosopher, trying to create order out of inner chaos. The brain is an artist of patterns. It looks for meaning even where none exists. That's why we see faces in clouds, hear destiny in coincidence, or search for purpose in pain. Philosophical thought is the mind's way of creating harmony out of randomness. And in that act of meaning making, the brain finds comfort. Even suffering becomes bearable when it fits into a story. That's why, across centuries, humans have built philosophies around love, loss, morality, and existence. Because our brains need stories to survive. There is something almost poetic about how neurons, simple cells, can produce something as vast and beautiful as a moral philosophy. Inside the folds of your cortex, every question about right and wrong, life and death, beauty and truth is just chemistry. And yet, that chemistry gives rise to compassion, art, faith, love. So when a philosopher says, the universe is conscious through us, it's not mere poetry. It's neuroscience in disguise. Because it is through our brains that the universe observes itself, questions itself, and finds wonder in its own existence. When you gaze at the night sky and feel small yet connected, that's your parietal lobe softening your sense of self-boundary. When you fall in love with an idea or a person, that's your dopamine circuits rewarding the attachment. When you experience awe, true awe, that silences your inner chatter, that's your default mode network quieting down, allowing pure presence to emerge. Every spiritual or philosophical experience has a neural signature, and yet that doesn't make it any less sacred. In fact, it makes it more miraculous that the material can produce the mystical. The connection between philosophy and neuroscience is, ultimately, the story of us learning to see ourselves clearly. Ancient philosophers sought truth through words and logic. Modern neuroscience seeks it through brain scans and data. But the goal is the same: understanding what it means to be human. And perhaps the truest wisdom lies not in choosing one over the other, but in realizing they are two sides of the same coin. So when you feel lost, uncertain, or full of questions, know that your mind is doing exactly what it was built to do. Questioning is not a flaw. It's the brain's natural movement toward understanding. Every doubt, every fear, every philosophical thought is your mind expanding, literally neurologically expanding, to hold more of life. You are not broken for questioning. You are alive because you question. In the end, maybe the greatest truth is this: the brain is both the instrument and the mystery. It creates meaning and yet remains partly unknowable. The philosophers tried to grasp it through thought, neuroscientists through science. But perhaps the beauty lies in never fully understanding, in leaving space for wonder. Because wonder is what keeps the neurons firing. Wonder is what keeps us human. And as you sit here listening, your brain is not passive. It is alive, rewiring itself with every sentence, every emotion, every pause. You're changing even now. New connections forming, old ones fading. You are, in real time, experiencing the very phenomenon we're talking about. Philosophy becoming biology. So take a deep breath. Feel the quiet hum inside your mind. That is life itself. Thinking, feeling, imagining. That is consciousness in motion. You're not separate from the great philosophers of the past. You share the same neural universe, the same spark of curiosity that drove them to ask, who am I? And why are we here? Perhaps the true purpose of thought is not to find final answers, but to fall in love with the questions, to feel the pulse of the mind as it reaches for truth, even if that truth is forever just out of reach, because it is in the reaching, the wondering, the imagining that we become fully human. And when you close this video and return to your life, remember this: every time you reflect, every time you pause and feel the weight of existence, Your brain and your soul are working together in perfect harmony, science and spirit dancing, logic and love intertwining, the neural and the philosophical becoming one. That, right there, is what it means to be alive.